On a Tuesday morning in July of 1987, a 17-ton boulder blocked the only road between three farms and the grain elevator in Shickley, Nebraska. Not a legendary boulder, just a piece of dark gray Precambrian granite, roughly the size of a large automobile, sitting in the embankment along County Road 14 in Fillmore County for as long as anyone could remember. The old-timers said it had been there before the road was paved, before the road was graded, before there was a road at all. Just a piece of glacial drift left behind when the ice sheets retreated 12,000 years ago. The boulder had always been there. It had always been harmless, half buried in the slope, not doing anything except existing. Until 2 weeks of heavy summer rain softened the embankment beneath it and deposited 17 tons of granite directly across the westbound lane of County Road 14, right at the only direct route between those three farms and the elevator, between the school bus and its stops, between the propane truck and the Kellner farm, which was already overdue. The county needed that road open. The county called Midwest Construction out of Grand Island. This is where the story begins. Let me tell you about Dennis Pratt, because to understand what happened on County Road 14, you need to understand the kind of man who arrived to fix it and the kind of confidence that expertise can build until it becomes a wall. Dennis was 45 years old with a civil engineering degree from the University of Nebraska. He had managed extraction and rigging jobs on bridge projects and pipeline construction all over the central states for 17 years. He had never met a problem he could not solve with enough horsepower and the right rigging. He was not arrogant in the way small men are arrogant. He was confident in the way competent men sometimes are, which is harder to dislodge because the confidence has evidence behind it. Midwest Construction sent Dennis with a Manitowoc 4100 hydraulic crane, 2 years old, rated for 60 tons, worth approximately $200,000. He brought a crew of 4 and arrived Wednesday morning with the plan already formed. He would rig the boulder, make the lift, clear the road, and be back in Grand Island by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He walked around the boulder, took measurements, consulted his rigging calculations on a clipboard, positioned the crane in what he described to his crew as a textbook outrigger configuration. The ground looked solid. The county survey had indicated stable soil to 4 feet. The boulder was large but manageable. By noon on Wednesday, the boulder had not moved. The rigging had slipped twice on the smooth granite surface. They spent the afternoon resetting. By 5 o'clock, Dennis was satisfied. They would make the lift first thing Thursday morning. Thursday morning, Dennis arrived and found the problem. The crane's rear outrigger pads had sunk 18 inches overnight. The saturated subsoil had kept moving beneath the road margin. The crane was no longer level. And Dennis Pratt did not make lifts with an unlevel crane. That was physics and liability, and 17 years of doing this without anyone getting killed. He called the county highway superintendent, Gerald Ferris, and explained the situation. They needed a second crane from Lincoln to reposition the first one. Gerald thanked him, hung up, and stood at the road closure, thinking about the school bus detoured since Tuesday and the Kellner farm without propane and the cost mounting in his budget with no end in sight. That was when Elmer Hatch pulled up in his truck. Now, let me stop here, because this is the moment the story turns. If you do not understand who Elmer Hatch was, you will not understand what he was about to offer, or why what happened next was not a miracle. It was not luck. It was knowledge. 3 generations of it, embedded in a machine that was 63 years old and still running. Elmer Hatch was 69 years old in the summer of 1987. He had farmed 320 acres in Fillmore County his entire adult life. The same land his father, Clarence, had farmed before him. The same land Clarence's father had broken with horses before that. He was lean and deliberate in the way of men who have done physical work for 50 years and learned that conservation is efficiency. He had not hurried at anything since the 1970s, when he decided that hurrying was a young man's solution to problems that patience solved better. In a machine shed west of Shickley, Elmer kept a 1924 Case steam traction engine. I need you to understand what that machine actually was, because calling a 1924 Case steam traction engine an old tractor is like calling a locomotive an old bicycle. They are related by category but not by nature. The Case steam traction engine was the workhorse of American agriculture from 1880 to 1930. At the peak of the steam era, the Case Works in Racine, Wisconsin was producing machines that farmers used for threshing grain, running sawmills, grading roads, and any pulling task that exceeded horses. These were not simple machines. They were the Industrial Revolution distilled into iron and sent out to work the land. Elmer's 1924 Case was rated at 20 horsepower, but the horsepower rating is the least interesting thing about it. Here's what matters. The machine weighed 18 tons fully fired and watered, 18 tons distributed across rear drive wheels that were 5 feet in diameter and 20 inches wide. Those wheels were designed for one purpose: to spread 18 tons across as much ground surface as possible so the machine could move through soft, wet, muddy fields without sinking, without spinning, without losing purchase. The boiler ran at 140 pounds per square inch. On hard ground behind good cable, a 20-horsepower Case could pull well in excess of its own weight. On soft ground, you managed your throttle, your angle, your patience. Elmer had managed all three for 41 years. He learned them from his father, Clarence, who learned them from Clarence's father, who learned them from the Case dealer in Hebron, who spent 2 years teaching the farmers of Fillmore County how to use what they had bought. 3 generations of operational knowledge, machines still running. Here's the thing Dennis Pratt's Manitowoc did not have. The Manitowoc was built for stable engineered surfaces, concrete pads, compacted gravel, prepared ground. Its outrigger pads concentrated force on a controlled area, which works perfectly when the ground is solid and fails completely when it is not. Elmer's drive wheels operated on the opposite principle. They were built for unstable ground, built for Nebraska in summer when the fields were wet and the steam engine kept moving because it spread 18 tons across 10 square feet of wheel contact instead of 4 square feet of outrigger pad. 10 square feet versus 4 square feet. That was the entire story. Elmer had lived it for 4 decades. Dennis had no reason to know it existed until the ground taught it to him the hard way. When Elmer heard about the stuck crane from Gerald at the co-op that Thursday morning, he set down his cup and asked one question. "What's the ground like out there?" Gerald told him. 2 weeks of rain, saturated subsoil, pads went 18 inches overnight. Elmer nodded. "I'll come take a look. I might be able to help." Gerald looked at him the way you look at someone when you're not sure whether to take them seriously. Everybody in the county knew about the steam engine in Elmer's shed. It was just something that was there. "You think that old machine could move it?" Gerald asked. "I think it's worth looking at the ground," Elmer said. He drove out to the site, walked around the boulder, pressed his boot heel into the soil in several places, testing what was happening beneath the surface. Looked at the grass along the road margin, the way it lay after the rain, the sheen of the soil in spots that told you something about what was happening 6 inches down. He spent 15 minutes doing this without saying anything to anyone. Dennis Pratt watched him from beside the crane. He watched the old farmer press his boot heel into the ground and walk in slow circles and felt impatience. He worked to keep under control. "Can I help you with something?" Dennis said finally. Elmer looked up. "I've got a 1924 Case steam engine, 18 tons, 5-foot drive wheels. I think I can move that boulder and pull your crane out after if you want." Dennis stared at him. For a moment, nothing happened, and then Dennis Pratt started laughing. Not a quiet laugh. The laugh of a man who has heard something so far outside his frame of reference that he cannot find a polite response. A laugh that closes a door before the door has been opened. He turned to 2 crew members and repeated what Elmer had said. They grinned. One shook his head. "Sir," Dennis said, "I appreciate the offer, but we've got a second crane coming from Lincoln this afternoon. We're going to shore up the pads and make the lift. We don't need a steam engine." Elmer looked at the sunken pads, looked at the boulder, looked at the ground. "Your second crane's going to have the same ground problem," he said. "This whole stretch is saturated 6 feet down. I can see it in the way the grass is lying." Dennis looked at the grass. He was not sure what he was supposed to see. "We'll use interlocking steel mats under the pads," he said. "Standard soft ground protocol." Elmer nodded once. "All right," he said. He walked back to his truck. He did not argue. He had said what he had to say. He drove home. He had his own work to do. The second crane arrived from Lincoln at 2:30 Thursday afternoon. A Grove RT-890, 80-ton capacity, built for rough terrain. The operator, Frank Wills, was experienced and efficient. He and Dennis spent an hour laying steel mat panels under the outrigger positions. They repositioned the Manitowoc. By 5:30 it was level and plumbed, rigging reset. By 6 they were ready. The Manitowoc's engine spooled up. Cables went taut. Load indicators read 70% of rated capacity. The boulder should have moved. It moved 3 inches. Then the mat panels under the rear outriggers began to tilt. The ground beneath the mats was compressing unevenly, in pockets of softness no surface assessment could have identified. The mats were doing exactly what they were designed to do. The ground was doing what saturated Nebraska subsoil does in a wet summer, moving, slowly, quietly, without drama. Dennis called off the lift. He stood beside the crane at 6:15 in the evening on a county road in Nebraska, looking at a 17-ton boulder that had moved 3 inches in 36 hours of professional effort by 2 modern cranes, and he knew what he was looking at. A problem his equipment could not solve, not on this ground. Gerald Ferris walked over from his truck and stood beside Dennis without saying anything. Dennis took off his hard hat. "I'm going to have to call the office," he said. Gerald nodded. There was a silence. "You want me to call Elmer Hatch?" Gerald said. Dennis was quiet for a long moment. He had been doing this job for 17 years. He had a professional reputation built on solving exactly these kinds of problems. He also had 2 cranes, 36 hours, and an unmoved boulder. And he was the kind of man who, when the situation demanded it, could set aside what he felt and look clearly at what the situation was. "Call him," Dennis said. Elmer arrived at 7 o'clock the next morning. He had spent the previous evening preparing. Firing the boiler of a 1924 Case steam traction engine is not a fast process. You build a fire in the firebox. You heat the water. You wait for the pressure gauge to climb to working pressure, and you manage that climb carefully, because steam under pressure in old iron is not something you rush. Elmer had started the fire at 5:30, so the engine would be at 140 pounds per square inch when he arrived. He drove it down County Road 14 at 4 miles per hour with his neighbor Harold Weiss following in a pickup truck carrying the rigging and a 3-inch steel cable Elmer had bought from a salvage yard in Hebron in 1971 and never once needed to replace. The steam engine's arrival was not quiet. A working steam traction engine produces an acoustic environment modern equipment does not produce. The chuff of the exhaust valve counting piston strokes, the hiss of the relief valve, the deep rhythmic vibration of the flywheel at 250 revolutions per minute, and underneath it all, the low, steady sound of the boiler working, a kind of controlled pressure you feel in your chest before you hear it in your ears. The crew heard Elmer coming before they saw him. They stopped what they were doing when the steam engine crested the small rise overlooking the work site. Every person there stopped moving and stared. It was enormous. Not enormous the way the Manitowoc was enormous. Enormous in a simpler, denser way. Built to be heavy, because heavy was the point. The black iron boiler gleaming in the morning light. The brass fittings polished by decades of maintenance. The drive wheels 5 feet tall and 20 inches wide, turning slowly on the gravel road. Not spinning, not slipping, just turning. Each revolution placing 18 tons of iron gently and deliberately on the surface beneath it. Dennis Pratt watched from beside his crane and said nothing. He watched Elmer Hatch drive an 18-ton steam engine built when Calvin Coolidge was in the White House down a Nebraska County road toward a job 2 modern cranes had failed to complete in a day and a half. Elmer stopped the engine 40 feet from the boulder, climbed down slowly, the platform being 6 feet off the ground and Elmer being 69, and walked to the boulder. He walked around it the same way he had 2 days earlier, looking at the ground, looking at the rock, looking at the relationship between the two. Harold waited by the truck. After 10 minutes, Elmer came back to Harold. They had a short conversation nobody else could hear. Harold nodded and went for the rigging. What Elmer had seen in those 10 minutes was this. The crane crews had been trying to lift the boulder, rig the top, Apply vertical force, clear the ground, correct procedure for a boulder on stable ground with adequate crane capacity. But here it had two problems compounding each other. First, the slipping. Smooth granite. Slings applied to the upper portion migrated upward along the curved surface and fell off. Every reset was an hour lost. Second, and more fundamental, the boulder did not need to be lifted. It needed to be rolled. It had come to rest at an angle, its base in contact with the ground across a small surface area. Force applied at the right angle at the lower forward edge would rotate the rock forward onto its smallest face. Roll it. And once rolling, drag it. Elmer had been rolling rocks out of fields since he was 20. His father showed him how. His father's father learned it from necessity, because when you farm ground covered by a glacier 12,000 years ago, you spend part of every decade moving rocks the frost pushes up, and you learn to move them efficiently or you lose years to the work. He and Harold rigged the cable around the boulder's lower forward edge, not the top, the base, angled forward and slightly down so the pulling force would rotate the rock forward rather than drag it backward against its own resistance. The rigging took 45 minutes. Dennis Pratt watched without speaking. The configuration was not in any rigging manual he had read. It was in Elmer Hatch's hands. When the rigging was set, Elmer climbed back up to the operator's platform. He checked the boiler pressure, 140 pounds per square inch, working pressure. He checked the cable run, straight, clean, no kinks. He looked at the ground between the engine and the boulder. The drive wheels were already sitting on it and had not sunk. 18 tons across 10 square feet of iron wheel on soil that had swallowed the Manitowoc's pads to 18 inches. He opened the throttle. The steam engine did not lurch. It did not spin its wheels. It moved forward at the same 4 miles per hour it had been moving since it left the shed. The cable went taut. Force transferred through the drawbar, through 3 inches of forged steel, through the rigging to the boulder's base at the angle Elmer had calculated. And the boulder, which had not moved in 36 hours of effort by 2 modern cranes worth $280,000 combined, rolled 18 inches forward onto a smaller face, but it moved. One of the crew made a sound, not a word. The involuntary sound a person makes when they see something they were certain was impossible simply happened in front of them. Elmer stopped the engine. He and Harold repositioned the cable attachment, adjusted the angle, reset. Elmer opened the throttle again. The boulder rolled again, and once more. In 4 incremental pulls over 90 minutes, moving the rigging. Between each attempt, repositioning the engine each time, Elmer moved 17 tons of Precambrian granite 14 feet off the road surface and onto the embankment shoulder where it settled and stopped. The road was clear. County Road 14 closed since Tuesday was open. The school bus could run. The propane truck could reach the Kellner farm. All of it resolved in 90 minutes by a 69-year-old farmer and a 63-year-old machine. 14 feet, 17 tons, 90 minutes. Dennis Pratt had been watching from 30 feet away for all of it. He had not spoken. His 2 crane operators had come to stand beside him, and the 3 of them watched in silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of men with nothing to say, but the silence of people watching a problem become a solved problem step by step at 4 miles per hour. When the boulder was clear, Elmer rigged the cable to the Manitowoc's rear outrigger frame. The $200,000 crane that had been stuck since Wednesday morning came out in 11 minutes. It rolled backward onto solid ground, mud trailing from its pads. Elmer shut down the throttle. He climbed down. He and Harold coiled the cable and loaded it into the truck. No celebration, no performance, just the work of finishing and putting things away. Dennis Pratt walked over. There was a silence between the 2 men, the kind with weight to it. The weight of 36 hours, 2 failed cranes, 1 successful steam engine, and everything those facts implied about the difference between what you know and what you think you know. What do I owe you? Dennis said. Elmer looked at the cleared road. Nothing, he said. Gerald called me. I came. That's how it works out here. Dennis stood there for a moment. He was tired. The road was clear. And the man in front of him had done something Dennis had not believed was possible until he watched it happen. I laughed at you, Dennis said, when you offered. I shouldn't have done that. Elmer looked at him without judgment or satisfaction. You didn't know what? The machine could do, Elmer said. Most people don't. I should have explained it better. He picked up his work gloves and put them in his jacket pocket. Well, he said. Now you know. He climbed back up to the operator's platform. He opened the throttle. The steam engine moved down County Road 14 at 4 miles per hour toward home. Smoke rising from the stack, the exhaust valve counting cadence, the flywheel spinning at 250 revolutions per minute, growing smaller, until it disappeared around the curve where the county road bent north toward Shickley. Dennis Pratt watched it go. Then he stood on the empty road for a while longer, looking at the place where the boulder had been. Let me tell you what this story is actually about, because it is not about a steam engine. It is not about a stuck crane. It is not about a county road in Nebraska in 1987. It is about two different relationships with knowledge and what happens when one of them encounters the limits of the other. Dennis Pratt knew what his equipment could do. He had the specifications, the ratings, the engineering calculations earned through 17 years of professional work. He understood his machines completely within the frame of what they were designed for. That's real expertise. What Dennis did not know was what Elmer Hatch's machine could do. Not because Elmer's machine was better in any general sense. A 1924 steam traction engine is slower, less efficient, more demanding than a modern hydraulic crane in every situation that crane was designed for. The Manitowoc outperforms Elmer's case in 9 out of 10 heavy lifting jobs on prepared ground. But the 10th situation, soft saturated ground, a rock that needed rolling, not lifting, a problem requiring distributed weight and low-angle pulling force, and the knowledge of how to read a boulder's resting position was the situation they were in. And in that situation, Elmer's machine was not just competitive. It was the only thing on the site that worked. The laugh was the revealing moment. Not because Dennis was cruel, he was not, but the laugh revealed the assumption underneath that newer and more expensive was necessarily better in all conditions. That any offer from the old machine's owner was not worth evaluating. That assumption cost 36 hours. It cost a second crane from Lincoln. It cost school buses on Detour and the Kellner farm without propane. It cost all of that because one man laughed before he listened. Elmer maintained that machine for 41 years after his father died. Not because he used it constantly, maybe twice a year, but because the knowledge embedded in it existed nowhere else in Fillmore County. The soft ground extraction, the rolling approach to boulders, the boiler management and cable rigging and incremental repositioning, these were not in any manual. They were passed from the case dealer in Hebron to Elmer's grandfather, from grandfather to Clarence, from Clarence to Elmer, through the act of working the machine together season after season. 3 generations of accumulated knowledge, still alive, still accurate, waiting for the one day in a decade when it was the only thing that could do the job. There is a specific kind of knowledge that lives inside old machines, not what is in the manual, not what can be derived from specifications. The knowledge that accumulates through decades of working a particular machine in a particular landscape, through 50 Nebraska summers, through fields saturated past the point where anything should have moved and the steam engine moved anyway. It cannot be transferred by documentation. It transfers only through the work itself, season after season, until the machine's responses become instinct and its limits become familiar, and its particular capabilities are as natural as reading the weather. Dennis Pratt submitted a revised site assessment report after the job that included a section on soft ground extraction and conditions where rolling was preferable to lifting. His company eventually adopted a protocol requiring soft ground consultation before crane deployment on road margin sites. A document about how to not need a steam engine, written by a man who had learned something from one. The steam engine still exists. Elmer died in 1999 at 81. His son Dale kept the machine the same way Elmer had kept it, maintained, functional, fired up twice a year. Dale's son has it now. 100 years old, still works. Dale told a reporter in 2006 that his father never talked much about the boulder job. It was just a thing that had happened. Dad didn't think it was a big deal. Dale said. He thought it was just a job that needed doing, and he had the right equipment. The fact that everybody else thought it was impossible confused him a little. He didn't understand why you would laugh at an offer before you understood what was being offered. The boulder is still on the embankment shoulder of County Road 14. The county never moved it further. Just a rock on the side of a road. The same rock that blocked the road for 4 days in the summer of 1987 until a 69-year-old farmer drove 18 tons of 1924 iron down the county road at 4 miles per hour and did in 90 minutes what 2 modern cranes could not do in 36 hours. There is a lesson here that has nothing to do with steam engines and everything to do with the moment Dennis Pratt laughed. Because Dennis was not a fool. He was a competent man with real expertise, and he still closed a door before he knew what was behind it. The machines we build become obsolete. The technology we trust gets replaced. The equipment we rely on has limits we do not see until we are standing on soft ground at 6:15 in the evening with 2 cranes and an unmoved boulder. But knowledge built through decades of careful work, passed hand to hand from father to son, from the weight of a 5-foot iron wheel pressed against Nebraska soil, that does not become obsolete. It waits. Waits in machine sheds and in the hands of men who have never explained themselves, because no one ever asked, until a road gets blocked and the cranes cannot do it, and someone finally makes the call. And the old man fires up his engine at 5:30 in the morning and drives 4 miles per hour down a county road, and 18 tons of 1924 iron sights down gently on soft Nebraska soil and does not sink, because it was built for exactly this. Built for the ground that swallows everything else. Built to keep pulling when the modern world runs out of answers. And 63 years later, on a July morning in Fillmore County, Nebraska, that is exactly what it did.